is popular. Small sailboats that are designed to be equally rowable or sailable is another kind of wrinkle in this. That I hope you learned something about this mode of transport, the 30,000 Islands region, Georgian Bay. I'm glad to have you aboard. So let's take a look here. Where are the 30,000 islands? Well, if you look at the Great Lakes, if you're like me, before I started going there, I kind of had a vague, hazy notion of how they're all put together. But Lake Huron actually has an arm that is the yellow arrow pointing right at Georgian Bay. And basically the east is this wilderness, this UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. It's about 860,000 acres, I believe. So, you know, not quite a million acres, but if you ever want to find terrain that's perfect to explore by boat, whether that's paddling, sailing, rowing, or some combination, the 30,000 Islands is it. And when I started doing outdoor things, I always looked to the west. I looked to Devil's Tower, Colorado, the Rockies, the Wind Rivers. And, you know, that's a 20-hour drive from Wisconsin or longer. It wasn't until it's half the distance away in the other direction, Georgian Bay. That's where we're going to be. So next thing I want to talk about is the mode of transport, right? So I'm hoping that you're interested in Georgian Bay, but I'm hoping some of you might also be interested in sail and oar cruising. So sail and oar really comes from a French term. In the 1980s. They started taking traditional French fishing boats, small boats, and using them recreationally without engines. And so the French term voile à viron, my French is terrible, so I probably butchered that, but it translates literally to sail oar. And modern boat designers, a lot of these are home-built boats, like the one you see in these pictures. A lot of boat designers have taken these traditional designs, built them with modern lightweight materials, and they really are a unique compromise where you can see there, you can sail them. So they're sailboats. They've got a pivoting centerboard so they won't slide sideways, but they're equally good performers under oars. So when the wind drops, you just drop your sail, drop your mast, and you can row. You don't need an engine. A lot of these are set up to be sleep aboard capability. You can see the tiny little tent that I'm able to put aboard my boat. I'm in the middle of building a larger tent, custom tent, that will give me sitting headroom and a lot more room underneath. But it's just a marvelous way to travel around the watery edges of the world. And these boats are almost as versatile as a kayak or a canoe. Fully loaded, my boat draws maybe 7 or 8 inches. So I can sail right up onto a beach. I can anchor in knee-deep water for the night, very tucked in, close to shore and sheltered. And the beautiful thing about this kind of mode of transport is, kayaking is wonderful, but you always have to be paddling, and you're kind of limited in your seating options. A small sailboat gives you a lot more room to move around. You don't have to carry anything. It's like backpacking where the boat does all the carrying for you. So you see some of the standard features you look for in these kind of boats. And as I said, most of them, or maybe a majority of them in the US, tend to be built by their owners in a backyard, in a garage. So that's what sail and oar cruising is all about. So let's take a look at Georgian Bay, which I think maybe is one of the world's finest areas for this kind of travel. Paddling, sailing, rowing, small boats. It's just gorgeous. So you can see the first part of my trip, 8 days, and I've barely scratched the surface. So I launched from Northern Ontario just so I could cut a few hours off my drive. And really the first 2 days, day 1 and day 2 on this screen, they're not Georgian Bay. Georgian Bay is the larger body that starts right at the edge where the little camp number 2 yellow circle is. So it took me 2 days to sail to Georgian Bay. And then even after more than a week on the water, I'm not even a third of the way across Jordan through the 30,000 islands region. So my presentation, I'm going to take you kind of in pretty good amount of detail through this first week. And then the second half of the presentation, we'll kind of pick up the pace and turn to, some memorable moments, but it won't be quite as much of a play-by-play. So I launched in a small town called Spanish, Ontario. Beautiful marina there. The folks are nice. I know I can park my boat and trailer or car and trailer for a long period of time. But I also knew that where I really wanted to be was Georgian Bay, because I had been there on some trips previously and I had more time available this time around. I hope to get farther in. So the first 2 days I just spent, you can see they're kind of long days on the water. I just sailed as quickly as I can. So a very quick overview of what that looked like. Here's the first 2 days. And again, this whole northern arm of Lake Huron here, getting into Georgian Bay, that's called the North Channel. It's also gorgeous. It's not quite as wild, but you can see from my launching point, day one, I didn't stop at all. 28 miles in a boat. Day two, pretty much the same thing, 25 miles. Day two, I actually had a stopover in town briefly. I needed to buy a towel, which I had forgotten to pack along. But that was the last town virtually that I saw on the whole trip was on day two. So just kind of skipping over 53 miles in 2 days, sitting there in comfort in my boat, letting the sails do the work. I had great favorable winds. Prevailing winds are out of the west and northwest generally in the summer. So pushing me right along at speed. And then day two, right at the edge of Georgian Bay, that's where I camped. So day one, if you're wondering, I'll kind of put you in the cockpit a little bit. What does it look like to actually take a trip? What's it feel like to be aboard a small sailing oar boat? So this is about halfway through day one. So heading for Georgian Bay, and if apologize if the motion, I know some people it's hard to watch the video, but it's fairly short. A few more seconds we'll be done. But this is basically what the day is like. When you want to make miles and you've got a good wind, you're sitting there in your boat and you're letting the wind take you where you need to go. You can see breakfast on board is not always the fanciest thing. So this is day two. I had anchored overnight in knee-deep water, tucked in real close to a sheltered island, no other boats around, had the whole place to myself. And you can see these planks in the middle of the photo here. This boat sets up to be a sleeping platform where you can set up that tent. This night it was so beautiful I didn't bother with a tent. So then sailing again, trying to make a lot of miles on day two. Didn't stop for lunch. I just handed over my steering duties to a rope and bungee self-steering rig and went ahead and ate breakfast on board. And day two ended up right at the edge of Georgian Bay. So out there in the background of the photo, that's where Georgian Bay begins. And you can also, I like this photo because it shows you the Georgian Bay terrain is a Canadian shield. So this is basically a vast expanse of territory in northern Canada and parts of the northern US around Wisconsin, where glaciers just came around and scraped basically all the soil off as they were flowing. So you've got a lot of bare granite bedrock in the Canadian Shield region, and the 30,000 islands is probably the best place to see it. Everywhere you go on the shore, you're going to see bare granite slabs like this. So you can see a freestanding tent is really helpful to have because you're not going to be pounding stakes into that granite. So this little campsite is less than a mile out of town, the second town and the last town of the whole trip, town of Killarney, Ontario. Wonderful fried fish restaurant there that I had a fried fish supper and then kept rowing a mile out of camp to get to Thibault Cove for the night. And then day three, we're finally in Georgian Bay. So this is a zoomed in view on the map. And day three, not a high mileage day at all. There wasn't much wind and I didn't care because I knew I wasn't going far. I wanted to get to the Fox Islands. That's in the lower right-hand corner of the screen map there. The satellite photo. The Fox Islands are just gorgeous. They're like the best of Georgian Bay. And what's great about them being only 8 miles out of town, if I had wanted to spend a few more hours in my car, I could have driven all the way to Killarney, launched here. If you only have a weekend or a few days or a week, you don't have to go any farther than this. 8 miles, easy paddle, easy row, or if you have a little bit of wind, I was able to mostly sail over there. So a little bit more about the Fox Islands. The landfall, the first island that I hit, West Fox Island, and it's got this gorgeous pebbly kind of beach. Not a good place to spend the night in a boat like mine. A kayak you can haul up the beach, but this is exposed to the prevailing winds. But it's well worth going around doing a little bit of exploring. I spent an hour or two here, blueberries, raspberries all over, leaving my boat tied to shore like that. And just wonderful. And right here in the Fox Islands is where the trip really starts to, you can feel the peace settling in, and you're away from everything, and you're starting to feel deep in the wilderness. And this is later that day, leaving Fox Island, looking for a place to camp. And again, you see that gorgeous Canadian Shield terrain. And you can see how simple a little boat like this is. It's not quite a kayak, but I'm in shin deep water here. I just sail or row right up there, and I'm able to find a little anchorage tucked in my anchor island. No matter what winds or storms or waves come up, there's no way my boat's going to run into any trouble tucked in there. That's the beauty of this kind of traveling. So, Fox Islands, I spent my day sailing around, landing on a few islands. Here's my campsite. Again, you can see bare granite everywhere. It's just gorgeous. So the next day, I knew I wanted to make a big hop. Depending on the winds, you're kind of always at the mercy of the wind. So I thought I'd go out there and see how far I could make it. But I kind of knew that this destination, the Bustard Islands, is where I really wanted to spend some time. I had spent one night in the Bustards on a previous trip, and I wanted more time. As it turned out, I had a really excellent following wind. So here you can see the wind just pushing us along from behind. If you're watching the waves, the wind is kind of coming in from our right-hand side, but a little behind. This is high speed for a sailing oarboat. We're probably hitting, I don't know, between 4 and 5 miles an hour. And you can just see in the center of the photo a very low-lying landmass. That's the Bustard Islands. So that's where I'm heading for the night. And windy, kind of a gray, rainy day, but it didn't rain too much. And the reward at the end of the day is a campsite on Tanvet Island. So you sail in out of Georgian Bay, big open waters, 60, 70 miles worth of fetch for the wind to build up waves. And then you tuck into the east side of Tanvet Island in the Bustards, and you're just completely sheltered. The water's just like glassy smooth and just peaceful. Nobody else around. The only other boats that could come anywhere near here would be canoes and kayaks. A conventional sailboat with a keel is way too shallow and rocky. So I had the place to myself. Day 5, I wanted to spend more time in the Bustards anyway, so I didn't have a plan to go anywhere. But day 5 was foggy. Like I woke up and I'm camped 10 feet from the water, and I couldn't see the water. So I knew, it's not a good day to be going on anyway. But, how much trouble can you get in when you're rowing around at 1 or 2 miles an hour? So you can see the red lines there. I spent day 5 exploring the east side of Tanvet Island. We'll take a look at what that looked like. So there's a beautiful little bay less than half a mile from my campsite. And this is how I spent the day pretty much. I think this is probably about 6 in the morning. On these trips, I tend to I'm so eager to get out on the water, I didn't even bother with breakfast. I probably threw a bagel or something in the boat with me and just took off. Spent the whole day rowing around. And thankfully, the video clip there artfully edited to cut out in about 3 more seconds. I'm about to row scrape right across a big slab of granite that I didn't see. So, no need to show you all that. But even in a boat with a 7-inch draft, you can run aground in Georgian Bay in the 30,000 Islands. So that was a whole day spent just poking around, and probably my favorite thing is to sail a good distance to a destination like this, and then just take your time to really dive in. So day 6 is already my 3rd day in the Bustard Islands. You can see Camp 4 and 5. I wasn't sure. I rode out a little ways, and I loaded up the whole camp because I figured, well, if it's still foggy, I can camp anywhere. But if I leave the camp set up, I have to come to the same place again. So I didn't know where I was going to end up that night. But I got out to the edge of the islands and saw this fog just set in. It was really cool. Like the whole island is under this dome of fog, and everything outside is foggy. But inside the interior passages, visibility was pretty decent. So I decided I was going to see if I could row all the way around the island. So I just set out counterclockwise, and at some point in here, I even got to do a little bit of an inside passage through some of the marshy, woodsy, narrow passages. Again, there's no other boat except for kayaks and canoes that can explore these waters. Here I am, just 70, 80 miles from my car, deep in the wilderness. I haven't seen another person in days, except for when I stopped in town. Just gorgeous. And you can see one of the things I really like about this particular boat, you can see that I'm sitting there facing forward. One of the things some people don't like about rowing is typically you're facing backwards and you're rowing and you can't see where you're going. Well, this boat is designed to have a seat on both sides of the oarlock so you can sit either direction. And so when I'm going slow and I don't need a lot of power, I can sit on the back seat and face forward like this. It's perfect for maneuvering through these narrow little lily pad marsh passages. Just the coolest. And again, you can't tell looking at this video that this is a foggy day. But if you were out on the big water of Georgian Bay, the fog would be socked in. You wouldn't even be able to see land from 50 yards out. It's a really good day to be inside and not out on the big water. So at the end of the day, I just camped in a new island, right? I didn't need to go all the way back to my previous campsite. And I found this little trio of islands clustered together in kind of a more open bay, and tied my boat to shore and set up camp and just had a wonderful evening. One of the things that I really like about Georgian Bay, as opposed to Lake Superior is marvelous, but water in Georgian Bay is warm. So I probably swam for more than an hour that evening when I got back. And then after I got done with my swim, sat down with a book and just enjoyed the evening at camp. Marvelous. And again, except for the passing through 2 towns on the 2nd day of my trip, I haven't seen another person yet. It's just marvelous. Now, people do come to the Bustard Islands as part of French River Provincial Park, but if they're coming in a boat with a deeper keel, they can't get to this side of the island. They're on the north side or the west side in some deeper anchorages. On my way over to the Bustards, sailing through the Bustards on the north side, there was an anchorage with probably 30 boats, everybody enjoying themselves, but kind of packed together like a campground. I get out to the east side where it's shallow and rocky, nobody. It's gorgeous. I woke up to this sunrise the next day. It's one of my favorite pictures. Just that pastel light, the colors, just the coolest thing. So you can see right here in this photo, we're looking pretty much due east. And behind me to the west, that's where I've come from. So come a fair distance by now, and I've had 3 nights in the Bustard Islands. And when this day started out like this, I knew it was finally clearing up. It wasn't going to be foggy. And so I decided, well, it's time to head out. I've kind of explored Tanvat Island as much as maybe I can. And I'm going to head east and see what happens. And the wonderful thing about this kind of camping is really couple of duffel bags for my tent, sleeping bag, and food. Throw them in the boat, lash them in, tie them down. So I kind of go about 50-50. On this island here, there was a nice flat slab of granite for the tent again. So I set up a tent on shore. Could have just as easily chosen to sleep aboard my boat here if there wouldn't have been a flat spot for the tent. And that is an advantage, I think, a big advantage that kayaks certainly don't really offer. And even in a canoe, not sure how eager I'd be to sleep aboard. But in this boat, it's pretty comfortable by backpacking standards for one person to sleep aboard. And, you know, you could get in 2 people side by side. The sleeping platform on this boat runs from that back wooden bench all the way to the forward end of the boat. So if you take the mast down, you've got an uninterrupted sleeping platform that's 4 feet wide and 10 feet long. So that's not bad. All right, so my next day, I've gotten out of the busters, had that lovely sunrise in the morning, and awake to a clear skies and no fog. And so what I really want to do is head down the coast. And the Bustard Islands, as you can see in this satellite photo image, they're kind of tucked up in the elbow of Georgian Bay. So if you would go west of the Bustards, the coast runs more or less east and west. But here in the elbow, it crooks down and the coast now starts to run more north and south, as you can see. And you can also see from the satellite image, everything here is rocks. All those islands, bare granite, granite slabs, granite domes, topped by white pines. And really, there's no development. I think I saw one cottage way back in the Fox Islands. There's some cottages on the west side of the Bustard Islands. But once you get into this small boat territory, you're gonna go for long stretches without seeing other people, other boats, other buildings of any kind. Although the satellite image does show you development is creeping in toward the shore, as you can see. So I set out, and what you can see here is when I left camp, a couple of miles into my trip, I suddenly had to take kind of a turn to the right there. I didn't really want to, but the winds were shifting around, and that was as close to my destination as I could sail. I really didn't want to go that direction, but it took a while for the winds to come around again, so that I could steer back into the land, like you see. So this is after I've left the Busters. This is again probably about halfway through a 15-mile day. And you can see this is pretty much standard what it's like to be aboard a boat, a sailing oar boat on some big water here. Thing about my boat is the sail comes down low enough so that if I want to make sure I'm not about to run into anything on the leeward side or the left side here in this video, you do have to reach over and lift it up from time to time. But again, I know, sorry about that. I know where I'm going. I'm heading east, and I don't really have a destination in mind. I'm just taking what the wind is going to give me. And typically in Georgian Bay, that means westerly winds is going to push you along eastward. And at any point along the way, I know 30,000 Islands is not a bad name for this place, right? There's going to be a little island, a little shelter, a little bay that I can tuck myself into and tie right to shore or anchor in knee-deep water, whatever. That you're never far from safety on a trip like this. So it looks like big water kind of out to the right, but if you look out, if you could look to the left in this video, we're probably only a mile from the mainland. You really do stick to the margins where the water and the land meet. It's not so much about making big open crossings as it is sticking close to the land and seeing what you can see. All right, so where did I end up? 7 days, my first week of the trip, just found this coolest little place, a place called Black Bay, which again, if you're in a deeper boat, it's going to be really hard to get in among the rocks and the shallows. In this boat, when I got close enough to shore, I just pulled up my centerboard, pulled up my rudder, pull out the oars, and I found this little bay, almost completely closed off from all directions, perfect shelter. Rode in there, tied to shore, set up a tent, and there I am, another evening to wander around the nearby islands and just explore. Still haven't seen another person on this trip. So next thing, I want to kind of take a break. So like I said, this presentation is going to go in 2 parts, really. And that first half, I tried to give a little bit more of a play-by-play, like if you had been on this trip with me, I'll give you a little bit of a feel what that would have been like. And again, in the image that we're looking from here, that upper left-hand corner is where we came from. And you can see the town of Killarney marked on the map at the top, kind of over on the left side. So that yellow arrow on this chart is pointing right about where we left off. It's 1 more day further on, so we left off a little bit north of that. But you can see Georgian Bay, the top, the north coast kind of runs east and west. At the Bustard Islands, it makes an elbow and starts running down to the southeast. So again, I'm 7 days into this trip, and I'm still not even halfway down the coast of Georgian Bay, halfway through the 30,000 islands. And it's just, you could spend a lifetime here and never run out of new islands, new rocks, new channels to explore. But I want to talk a little bit about, okay, if you are interested in doing this kind of travel, whether it's paddling a kayak, taking a canoe, or starting a small sailboat or even a big sailboat. So how do you do it? If you look on, the reason I chose this image, it shows which kind of charts or which number charts you need to navigate. So these are all Canadian waters. So we're over the border into Canada. So you need to look at the Canadian Hydrographic Services. That's their government chart agency. And the charts that you need for the 30,000 islands region are from north to south, 2204, 2203, 2202. And then of course there's a big chart that covers the entire Georgian Bay in one ginormous sheet of paper. That's way too big to be very useful on a small boat. But I did have the big chart along because it helps to give you a sense of the big picture. But the ones I really want to talk about are the smaller ones, the 2202, 3, and 4. If you look at the map, they seem like they're really weird shapes, right? No one would cut out a chart like that. The reason they do it that way is, first of all, 2204, look at the top, the yellow, green, yellow one. 2204 is the first chart I needed when I left Killarney. And it's actually a set of 4 different charts. And the reason they do it that way is they're able, if you charted this whole thing, you'd waste a lot of space on your paper just showing open water. You don't need to chart that for a small boat. So what these do is they align the charts with the shore so that you've got a long, narrow strip. And I've got one here, which I will show you. So you can see the thumbnail video. This is a long, long chart, right? But it's all the coastline that you need. So because the chart is turned to the shore, you can see that it covers a lot of the coast. And it covers almost nothing offshore. So the strip charts are really handy in that it gives you exactly the information you need. It charts the entire shoreline in pretty good amount of detail. And then when you run out of that chart, a little bit of overlap, so you pull out your next strip chart, and eventually that one chart has, I believe, 4 different charts in the collection. Will get you all the way down to the yellow and into the red chart, and that's when you pull out 2203. So I had the charts to go all the way down to the end of Georgian Bay. I didn't know how far I would get, but that's what you do for navigating. And it can seem maybe intimidating to people who haven't been out on the water a lot. Like, how do you get lost? I mean, 30,000 islands, right? Seems easy to get lost. Well, it's not really, because visibility, except for those foggy days I had, but visibility is generally pretty good in the Great Lakes in the summer. So you can sail along and see the shore. And if you're keeping track of where you are, oh, this island on the chart here must be that island there, you kind of get in a habit of always knowing where you are. And a hand compass. I have it tied into the boat sitting on the bench. If I need to know, oh, is that north? Or is that island to the north of me? I can take a bearing with my hand compass, but I rarely need to. The thing is, these boats probably, on average, move slower than walking pace. When you're going that slow, it takes you a long time to get too far into trouble, right? I might go a half a mile out of my way before I notice, oh, that island that I thought was this island is actually that island. So I might have gone, not the best route, but it doesn't really matter, right? I don't have a set destination in mind. So navigation is just a wonderful mix here of complexity. You see all these intricate coastlines and thousands of islands everywhere, and it just seems like you're really in a wilderness, a maze. But at the same time, it's really not that hard to follow along where you are. So I didn't take any electronics at all, but here, that probably a lot of people would take a GPS or something as a backup. For me, that I've just never been interested in that, but I did make some concessions to electronics in the form of a handheld radio. Not because a VHS radio, you're not going to probably have a very big range because I don't have an antenna other than the small hand antenna, but it's good enough to pick up weather forecasts. So for this trip, I was like, oh, that's important. I want to know if it's going to be a bad weather day so I can stay in at camp and be safe. So it's a flurry of loading and getting ready. I pack up all my gear in the boat, and I'm like, well, I bought new batteries for my radio, but I'm not going to put them in yet. It's a nice day. I'll put them in at camp. So I sailed to my first campsite, and the next morning I was like, well, looks like a nice day, but I brought the radio, so I'm going to get a weather forecast. And I opened it up, and I had bought AA batteries, right? Every little handheld portable gadget takes AA batteries. Nope, this one takes AAA batteries. So like, well, it's a nice day anyway. It doesn't matter, and I'm sailing right through town today. So second day of the trip, I went to a store, bought my towel, then I bought a package of 4 AA batteries, or AAA batteries rather. Like, well, now I'm good. And I sailed the rest of the day. I camped on the night 2, and here's my foray into electronics. The next morning, day 3, I'm like, well, now I can get a weather report. I can feel a little safer. And I pulled out my radio, and I pulled out my pack of 4 AAA batteries. And my radio takes 5 AAA batteries. So ordinarily, I think it's a good idea to carry along a handheld radio, if only for weather reports. As it turned out for this trip, I was back to do I hear rain dripping on my tent fly or not? That was kind of the extent of my weather forecasting. And honestly, if you're going to try something like that, the Great Lakes in summer is probably one of the most friendly areas you can get to. Like I say, even if halfway through a day the weather went bad and I didn't know it was going to happen, there are so many places to duck in out of shelter. As long as you're following along on your chart, you know where you are, that's just not going to be a problem. So electronics, maybe someday I will get better. Maybe someday I'll even take a leap into the GPS. But honestly, for this kind of cruising, you should just it's possible to go out there and be perfectly comfortable with just a paper map and a compass. And to be honest, if I looked at the compass half a dozen times in 2 weeks, I would be surprised. It's usually just eyeball navigation. And last thing I'll say about these charts is one of the cool things about these charts is the Canadian government maintains what they call the small craft route, which is basically what these strip charts cover. It's an inside route for if your boat's too small for you to feel comfortable going way out on the big waters of Georgian Bay. You know, that's 60 miles across. Then you can stick to this inside route, and there's a lot of narrow passages and things that have navigation markers and buoys and things like that. So even a fairly deep draft boat, if you're following the buoyed routes, can stick to this inshore small craft route. In a boat like mine or in a canoe or a kayak, geez, you go wherever you want to, pretty much. So I use these charts mainly as a way to keep myself off of the marked route, so I'm less likely to see other people, right? So I can find my own way thanks to the charts, and I don't need to worry about sticking in the channel when I can sail in knee deep water. It's really nice. All right, so another thing that occurs to me, if you have not spent a lot of time on a small boat yourself, maybe it seems like that would be a bit of an ordeal. So what we're looking at here is the back end of my boat, and that's the tiller, right? So this is how you steer. I don't have a wheel. I don't have anything fancy like a big boat might have. What I've got is a stick, this tiller, attached to the rudder. So if I push that tiller one way, the rudder turns the boat the other direction. But you don't want to be sitting here, like some of these days, I might be sailing my boat nonstop for 10 hours, right? Day one and day two, I didn't stop on land at all in day one. 28 miles straight, probably 8 hours of sailing. So you don't want to sit there and have to steer the whole way. But if you notice, you can see already in the first image, it doesn't seem like anybody's steering. Let's take a look how that works. So the boat's sailing along, holding a straight line, and now I reach out, I push the tiller, and we're in a gradual turn. Now we're turning back, but I don't need to hang on to that tiller. So this is, if you are interested in this kind of boating, this trick is really a handy one. That other boat you see in the photo, this is from a different trip in Wisconsin. This is not Georgian Bay. And that's my brother up there in the boat that he built. And he's the one who kind of got me started with this self-steering. But let's jump back and take a look at it again. You can see that underneath in the center of the tiller, there's a little bump. That bump is like a little cleat that put in there, glued to the bottom of the tiller just so that it'll hold a line. And you can see there's a line running from across the boat in the back that hooks over that cleat. And at the end of that line is a bungee loop on the right-hand side. And you pull enough tension on the bungee and that line is pulling pretty tightly back. And so when I let go of the tiller, there's so much tension on that line that the tiller stays wherever I put it. The boat will steer a safe course, but at any point, I can just reach out and move the tiller, right? So that you don't have to engage it, you don't have to turn it on or turn it off. You can steer at any moment, or you can let go, hands-free sailing at any moment. And that is one of the essential features if you're going to be spending long days on a boat, like I say, 8-10 hours a day sometimes for me. It's really nice not to have to hang on to the dang tiller. And the sad thing is I've been sailing since the mid-1990s, and that 49 cents worth of line and bungee steers a straighter course than I can. So it's really the best upgrade you can make. It's so cheap and so easy to use. I've taken to calling mine the 49-cent autopilot. So if you have a boat and you don't have one of these rigged, it's the best upgrade you can make, honestly. Do that. And like pretty much these days, I do whatever I want when I'm aboard my boat. I tie off the sail sheet if the winds aren't gusty, and then I can have both hands free and I do whatever I want while the boat sails itself. And it makes those long days a little easier to deal with. You can make yourself a quick meal. You can even cook aboard, although I haven't bothered. You can make a quick meal. You can pull out a new chart. You can take a compass bearing. You can read a book if you wanted to, but frankly, I'm always more interested in seeing what's going on. So self-steering, crucial upgrade to a cruising boat. So let's take a look at part two. As I said, part one of this presentation was really kind of my attempt to give you a play-by-play. And it pretty much took us all the way down to what you can see marked as day 7 on this trip. So I did sail one day further on to day 8 down at the bottom right-hand corner. And then something happened along the way to Camp 8 that made me decide that it was time to turn around and head back. So what we're looking here at, the red line is my track on the backward trip. So I had left my car and trailer parked in Spanish, 115 miles away to the northwest. And then it was time, when I was running out of time, turn around and sail back essentially the same route with some different stopover points. You can see I left the campsites on the way out, left those in white, so you can kind of compare how I did. So day 7, day 8, day 8's where I turned around, and again, this is the route. So this won't be so much a day-by-day, play-by-play, but what I've done here for the second half of the presentation is just collect a few of the memorable moments that happened on this trip, and just posted a few photos from each one to give you some sense of, okay, so what was the second half of the trip like? So one of the things that was really cool on this trip was reptiles. Ran into some really interesting kind of brown toads in the Fox Islands. Got some nice close-up photos of them. But then when I was in the Busters, on the left here, this northern water snake came into my camp, right? This is 10 feet from my tent. And as soon as he saw me notice him, he just froze there in the grass. So I was able to get up and get a nice few close-up shots of him. But just thought it was the coolest thing. And then on my trip around Tanbat Island that day, where I went like 8 miles all the way around the island rowing, the snake on the right is an eastern Massasauga rattlesnake. And they're fairly rare. They're an endangered species. And I was rowing along, and I stopped at a little rocky island for some lunch. I tied my boat to shore, and I got out, and I'm on this granite slab looking over the water, and saw a snake headed my way, just kind of sidewindering across the surface of the water. Got to the rock and just looked around for a little while, found a low angle ramp, and then slithered up onto the rock right on my feet. I'm using a pretty big zoom lens here, so no, I did not get that close to a rattlesnake, but the snake was cool, and you can see raising her tail to rattle me off, to give me a warning, but didn't actually rattle. So I got back, when I got back to civilization after, I was able to report to the Ontario Snake and Reptile Atlas, like I had the exact coordinates on the map of where I had this sighting. They're trying to track habitats and stuff. So wildlife in this mode of travel is something you see all the time. So snakes are there, minks like crazy. The 30,000 islands, the whole eastern shore of Georgian Bay is just filled with minks. I think probably 3 or 4 times every week I had minks at or near my campsite. And they always managed to kind of get away before I could get a camera handy. But it's just really cool to be able to be so quiet. You're not making any noise if you're traveling by sail or by oar. And so you get a lot closer to the wildlife. All right. This was a particularly memorable moment. So I said something on the way to Camp 8 made me decide that it was time to turn around. Well, this is the something. I was sailing through a particularly kind of narrow, rocky passage. Like it would have been maybe as wide, in spots, maybe 20, 25 feet wide, between some pretty dangerous shoals. Like if I had hit these rocks, it could have damaged my boat pretty significantly. And pretty wavy, and I'm sailing through that, and I hear this tremendous brittle crack, like something snapping from the mast. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounded bad. But nothing really happened. I kept sailing, and eventually anchored for a bit so I could check out what had happened, but I wasn't able to find out what happened. It wasn't until I got to camp later on and took the mast down that I found the source of the crack. And it was the little tenon at the foot of the mast. Well, that's built to go into a hole in the bottom of the boat, right? So the mast is held in place at the deck or at the keel level. And what I had done, my mistake was the typical way to keep water out of holes in your boat, right? So it's not, water doesn't sit in there and start to rot the wood, is you drill a bigger hole than you need, so maybe that big, and you fill with epoxy glue that becomes hard, like a hard plastic, so that then you re-drill in the epoxy the right size for your mast. And the reason is water won't penetrate the epoxy, so there's no wood exposed to soak up water. So I had done that. I had drilled a bigger hole than I needed, intending to fill it with epoxy, but in the rush to launch my boat and get everything ready, I never actually did that. So the hole was oversized, and that allowed the mast to move around. And eventually, in those big waves, it snapped right off. And so I was like, well, now my mast is broken. I'm 115, 120 miles from the car. Probably not smart to keep going till I can get a real repair made. And on the right, you can see, okay, so how did I handle this? Well, a couple of wedges to jam that mast into the box very tightly. You can see some line wrapped around the base of the mast. So I had set up a pulley system so that the mast was being pulled tightly. And then the blue bag at the bottom of that right-hand photo, that's a ballast bag. It's 25 pounds of steel shot in a dry bag. So I put that ballast behind the mast and I wedged it in there with my camera tripod firmly so that the mast was not able to kick backward, right? I had the ballast bag against it, supported with a pole. And that was the best I could do as a jury rig. I did glue the tenon back on the mast as well, but I didn't really trust the glue by itself. So they're like, well, it's a damaged mast. I think it'll be fine, but it's probably good to, after 8 days, I'd rather turn around than end up trying to go farther and have the mast break for real. As it turned out, it was fine. The mast held up, and when I got home, my brother helped me fix it up and put a new tenon in the bottom, and still going strong. But that was memorable. While I was waiting, so the glue, I wanted to give it a full 24 hours to dry. So when I got to camp and I fixed the mast and I glued that piece back in, I had a whole day to sit here on this tiny little island off the shore of Ontario and just happened to catch the very beginning of that summer's largest forest fire. So it was just a tiny wisp of smoke in the afternoon when I sailed by. By the time I got to my island campsite, that afternoon, this is what that fire was looking like. Fire was Perry Sound 33, and I think it might have been the largest, if not the largest, certainly one of the largest forest fires in a very bad fire year for Ontario. So I had a front row seat to this forest fire, sitting at camp waiting for the glue to dry, and you can see the Canadian Forest Service had their water bombers. So in that center photo, water bomber swooping down over the fire and dumping water. They would circle around my camp and land behind me to scoop up more water. And I watched these guys work this fire for basically 2 days straight. A terrible fire. Later in the summer, it actually closed down the entire small craft route. So the inside sailing route that I was on, I didn't know it at the time, but they were already closing it down and stopping boats from coming in here. Haven't talked a lot about food cruising. So on the left, you see that Hunt saw. So when I was in town buying my AAA batteries and my towel, I was like, well, maybe some night it's going to be a long day and there's going to be, I just want something simple, some canned food I can heat up very fast or even eat cold if I want to. And I had one of those long days and this big can of what looked like some nice spiral pasta, and I couldn't wait to open it up. And I got my pasta out. I had 2 cans of this stuff lying. I opened one, and it's just sauce. There's no pasta. And it was a crushing, depressing moment. Like, now I've got this ginormous can of pasta sauce and no actual food other than the sauce. And that's the second can. Like, I bought two thinking, oh man, that pasta, no, forget it. Books, center photo. This is the last night of the trip. So I'm almost back to the car. Again, that bare granite of the Canadian Shield. And there's nothing better than to anchor a boat, tie ashore, set up your camp, and then, yeah, nothing to do. You got all the time in the world when you're done wandering around exploring, just to kick back with a nice book. And then the flip side, the bonus of stopping in town when you want to. On the way home, I stopped in Killarney and got myself some pizza. So yes, you can kind of live the decadent life of luxury from time to time on these trips as well. Let's see what's next. So this next clip we're going to watch, again, it's short, maybe 20 seconds. This was probably the best day of the whole trip. This is the very first day after I fixed the mast. So I started out that morning with a broken mast, fixed, but I wasn't sure how good, and kind of nervous all morning long, but nothing was breaking. It seemed to be going okay. So I'm like, well, the other thing was I had a wind from the east. So the prevailing winds are normally westerly, pushing me farther away from my car and trailer. But this day they were coming from the east, pushing me right back where I wanted to go. So even though I was nervous about the mast breaking, I kept going. You can see here in this the screen that the bottom of the sail is rolled up and tied there. If you're not a sailor, that might look a little strange to you, but that's called reefing. And reefing is just a way of reducing the sail area that's exposed to the wind. So because I thought my mast was probably weaker than it should be, I wanted a smaller sail so it was putting less strain on the mast. So I rolled up the bottom of the sail, and you can see tied it off here. Normally, I don't know what I was doing at this moment. Normally, those are tied with slip knots, so it's real fast to untie. But so my sail, full sail is about 85 square feet. Reefing, one reef in like this takes it down to about 70 square feet. That's a significant reduction in wind. And I sailed to a wonderful island in mid-afternoon. I had gone about 24 miles and I'm like, well, I could camp here. It's a good campsite. But that east wind was still blowing. So I went out again, hoping I could go a little farther. And this is that evening sail, the best sail of the whole trip. I clocked it on, or I timed it and looked on a map later, and I covered 10 miles in, about 80 minutes, which that's not really fast. It's like a slow jog if you were on land. But in a boat this size, that's really cruising along fast. So this is what it's like on the fastest point of sail to be aboard a little sail and oar boat. You can see the waves are coming from behind us. The wind is pushing us along. That's why we're going so fast. And this day covered close to 40 miles in that day. And right up there on the right-hand side there, that island we see, that's campsite for the night. So this is the last little bit of a very wonderful day. So that's really it. I mean, the trip out there, just marvelous. The trip back, you'd think, oh, I've seen all this again. No, you haven't. The 30,000 islands is so big and so complicated and complex that even though I was sailing pretty close to the same route, it wasn't at all the same thing. So I've been coming to the Georgian Bay since 2014. Hopefully, obviously, with the Canadian border closed, I'm probably not going to get up there this summer. But as soon as the border is open and it's available, I'll be back at Georgian Bay. This is hands down. I've talked to people who have sailed everywhere in the world. Georgian Bay, the 30,000 islands, is at the top of a lot of people's lists of this is the best place to go in a small boat. So I hope you have enjoyed my presentation. If you do want to know a little bit more, I'm going to be posting this presentation along with some resources and some links and some videos on my website. So I do have a little film, a couple of little films, probably about 10 minutes each, that kind of take you through more of a step-by-step of this trip. So you could do a little bit of sailing each day. So if you want to look at 20 minutes of film about the same trip, I'll also have links to magazine articles that I've written about similar trips, and a magazine article about this trip in the being fogged in at the Bustard Islands. But I don't know if you can tell from my presentation, but there's nothing that makes me happier than being out in the wilderness in a small boat. Something extra special because I helped build this particular boat. But you get to a wonderful place like this. This is the Churchill Islands in the middle of Georgian Bay in the 30,000 islands. You tie your boat to shore, blue skies, sunny day. I was talking about minks before, 5 minutes before I took this photo. I was rowing up to shore. A mink swam right across my path in front of my boat. They're all over the place. So if you're intrigued at all, go to my website. It'll tell you what you need to know to get started in boat building and this kind of travel, if that's something you think you might want to look into. I don't know if you can see the website, but it's www.tompamperin.com. And thank you to Midwest Mountaineering for hosting this virtual venue. I really appreciate the chance to get out and see a bunch of cool presentations and share a little bit about what I'm up to. At this point, I guess if there are no questions coming in from the chat, I think that is all I'm going to do. And I'm going to leave you with a final wish for happy sailing or happy paddling if you're more of a paddler. All right, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, Tom. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us for Tom Pamperin's presentation. It was awesome to learn more about this area of the Georgian Bay. And feel free to check out the Midwest Mountaineering YouTube page. I just put it in the chat for this presentation and the other ones that have already happened. We have recordings of them all there. And then we have another one coming up at 2 p.m. from Bob O'Hara. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Madison. Bye.
Bye, Tom.